Hey again, everybody, and welcome to the Experience Maker Show, episode number 23. This is Dan Gingiss, your host, customer experience virtual speaker and writer and podcaster. You may notice something different this week, and that is that I have finally ditched the headset. And that is such an interesting customer experience that I want to tell you about real quickly. It took me almost 4 months looking through support articles and Googling all sorts of things and drivers and all this stuff to figure out why my computer's microphone had just suddenly died. And I knew I wasn't the only one because I saw lots of other complaints out there. And I asked a question on a support site, and literally 4 months later, somebody finally put an answer that worked for me. And so I am super happy to ditch the headset and use the microphone that was installed in the computer. I feel so free today. But anyway, wanted to introduce our guest. He's a good friend of mine and super excited to talk to him. Really, really smart guy. The Senior Director of Strategy and Innovation at Salesforce. Brian Vellmure, how you doing, man?
What's going on, Dan? Good to see you. So the irony is, I've been having problems with my mic, and I have a headset standing by just in case we have audio issues. So you may actually see me going to headset. The other thing that's cool is I'm glad I'm episode 23. I was an athlete growing up. My number all the way through high school and college was number 23. Fitting that I'm the privileged guest on your show today.
Outstanding. Well, and you mentioned me living in Chicago before we went on air, and so you probably know that number 23 is a fairly big number here in Chicago. Both for that guy that actually, humorously enough, everywhere I travel in the world, still now,
it's amazing.
When I tell people I'm from Chicago, the first 2 words out of their mouth are Michael and Jordan every time. It's amazing.
It's incredible.
And then as a Cubs fan, Ryan Sandberg also wore 23, so it's a big number here.
It is a big number. The Last Dance, speaking of Jordan, man, that's one of the best media shows that I've seen for quite some time. So if I'm sure you've seen it. I'm sure that
it was very well done. Very well
many,
done.
Many people listening have probably seen it or watching have probably seen it. But if you haven't, you need to. The Last Dance, it's a worthwhile investment.
Yeah, absolutely. That was also about the last time I was interested in NBA basketball, but that's a different story. So Brian, for the audience that doesn't know you, tell us a little bit about yourself. You've done some really interesting things and been parts of different organizations and then landed at Salesforce. So tell us how you got there.
Quick journey. Okay. So I was born, no, I'm not going to go that far back. So started my career in the universe of ERP consulting when the world was afraid of sort of like Y2K was coming, the whole world was going to end. And so there was quite a bit of business in the world of ERP and, bringing digitalization to organizations. And then once that dried up, the companies that I was working for at the time was looking for the next big thing through a tech perspective. And it happened to be Salesforce automation. And I raised my hand and thought, hey, I'm a customer facing guy. I really enjoy that. And so spent several years in the world of SFA and CRM and started my own kind of boutique firm selling and implementing CRM solutions. And then in about 2007 or so, just became really fascinated with what was happening in social and sort of on the side would just, curiously peruse Twitter at that time and, LinkedIn. And there was actually a predecessor to LinkedIn. I'm trying to remember. Rise, RYZE, actually was the more popular professional social network, surprisingly enough, back in 05, 06.
I actually remember one. Were you ever part of one called 6 Degrees?
There was 6 Degrees. That came a little bit later. But anyway, I think like to kind of continue, ended up sort of meeting through Twitter, much like it happens today, but in a totally different environment. A lot of people that had similar curiosities and interests, and just began, transitioning and interacting on social networks. Began writing a blog, and then all of a sudden started getting calls from tech companies, some of them I had never heard of. And then, a lot of the big guys came calling, asking me for my perspective on where I thought the future was heading, what they should be doing, and ultimately turned a good portion of my business into advisory consulting for a lot of the large tech firms, SAP, Oracle, Salesforce, Microsoft, several of the others in the realm of communities, a lot of the community vendors, Jive, Lithium, et cetera, at that time, and a lot of the analytics vendors. And so was just always fascinated and focused my time and attention at the intersection of customer experience and emerging technology. And what happened sort of accidentally is my mix of practitioner engagements, like actually hitting the friction of driving change in organizations, that share of my portfolio reduced. And a lot of my portfolio was more around thought leadership. And that was great. I love standing, like you, love standing on stages and writing and doing this type of stuff. But I also like to blend that with the mix of, hitting some of the ideas, concepts, against the friction of reality. And oftentimes it's hard. And I remember just this pattern of events where, after speeches, people would come up to me, "Hey, that was so great. I was so inspired." And, I'd often say, "Thank you." Always, just a humbling honor when someone gives you a compliment after you spent some time investing and sharing. But I would ask, like, "Hey, what's the most actionable thing? Like, what stood out the most? What are you going to take back to your team?" And more times than not, I got a reaction which went something like, "Oh, I don't even know. The stuff you were talking about is so far ahead of where I am right now. And, like, I wish we could have permission to have those conversations, but the backlog is so big and I'm already working 12-hour days." And so around that same time, I had some colleagues at Salesforce, and they had told me about this sort of unique program that was sponsored by Mark Benioff. It was sort of an experiment, and they thought I might be a good fit. And so sort of like worlds intersected a little bit. I wasn't necessarily looking to join any, I wasn't looking for a job change or a career change, but it was intriguing enough, right? I probably had, I don't know, at that time, 40 or 50 friends that either were working for Salesforce or had worked for Salesforce. And truth be told, I was as curious as much as anything as to what went on in that place, because almost all of them uniformly said, "It's great. I love it." And so I was literally wondering, like, is it some sort of cult? Do you get indoctrinated? Do you have to say that? I was just curious. But through my time, I've been at Salesforce now for about 4.5 years, and I've worn a variety of hats. And I'll be quiet in a minute because I know I'm kind of rambling here, but have led a lot of projects that you would not necessarily think of Salesforce being the primary candidate for. So when the premise of Ignite was essentially that we had more inbound demand from CEOs. Salesforce had long been recognized for being a sales and marketing leader, a CRM leader, a cloud computing pioneer. All of a sudden, there was a number of CEOs coming to Mark and the executive team going like, "Hey, we're dealing with unprecedented transformation, and we're being forced to think beyond the boundaries of our capabilities. Our industry is being reshaped, our company's being reshaped. You guys seem to do fairly well in adapting really rapidly to the external dynamics that you don't have control over. Help us. How do you do that? Help us think through that." And so our team was sort of deployed to engage in that type of dialogue with our most valuable customers. And then, in the last year or so, we've realized, like, the work that we're doing for specific customers is really, really valuable, because of, oftentimes we're working on strategic initiatives that are considered maybe competitive IP. We've traditionally kept those intentionally sort of like hush hush, but then we sort of realized, like, if we apply a proper scrubbing to the work that we're doing and we're not compromising anything, we probably can help both our internal teams globally and our customers globally get a lot more leverage out of the work that we're doing. So I've been investing more in translating, cleaning, codifying, and then sharing, some of the things that we're doing. And customer experience, as you might expect, is often like right smack dab in the middle of all that stuff.
Sure. Well, I want to jump to something that you said about playing in the intersection of customer experience and emerging technology. And I'm just interested, maybe look back the last few years. Let's not go back too far, but the last few years, what types of technology do you think have had the most impact on customer experience?
I would say, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is sort of like this idea of data and identity data, and how we've watched like the in B2C facing realm, or especially in if you think of like CPG companies, or if you think about entertainment companies, they never had to. They were traditionally B2B companies, and then all of a sudden, like the movement towards direct to consumer forced them into maybe we should understand more about our consumers so that we can appropriately respond. And so I've seen this transition from not caring to caring a lot, and then caring but having no clue how to actually do it. I was working with a fairly large studio in Hollywood, and the idea of understanding who was consuming their data was capturing an email address. If you go back in time, and all of a sudden, then you watch the advance of first party data, second party data, third party data, and then all the implications that had on privacy. And now you see, where that's gone with, cookies being sunset and all the privacy laws and regulations around what you can do with data, what you want to capture with data. So I think that's sort of like the big broad bucket, without getting like super tactical and naming names of, what I think that stands out quite a bit. Obviously, AI has played a fairly significant role. How do we, either through voice or through chat or through any of the channels that our customers might interact with us, like how do we embed AI, and how do we, reduce the cost associated with getting the customer to the place that they want to go, right? And that's when you sort of get into these cultural philosophies of what these businesses are optimizing for. Is it strictly cost takeout, or is it how do we create a win and make it cheaper and more efficient? So I don't know. Those are big, broad universes. I will also say, in this current moment, one of the things that I'm curious about is how the implications of COVID and the fact that everybody is spending way more time in their home, how that is changing. Obviously, we've seen, what we're doing right now become like a persistent presence in everybody's lives. We've sort of seen the ebb and flow of, people in their 70s and 80s having happy hours through Zoom. And I think that's sort of like died off. And so some of this stuff, telemedicine, right, is a big component, and people are realizing, wow, like I didn't really have an interest in this, but now this is not only something I had to do, but perhaps it's even better. Same thing with online grocery shopping, right? People resisted maybe doing that for a long time. They've gone like, wow, this is maybe even better than.
May not go back. Yeah.
I may not go back. And so I think that's the interesting part about the moment we find ourselves in now. And then one last thing, and then I'll be quiet. But I would have expected there's been a decent amount of progress for the last, say, 5 years in the realm of virtual reality, augmented reality. I would have expected that this moment would have been an accelerator. And the data that I've seen is like it really hasn't done much. Like the demand and the interest and the consumption for those technologies that, seemed fairly logical to see an uptick, not quite there yet. So I think that's an interesting observation as well.
It's funny you say that, because I have never really been an early adopter of technology. I definitely adopt. I get there. I was a late adopter to the iPhone, for example, and now I upgrade every year like everybody else does. But I've also been a little bit of a skeptic over the years about how quickly technology takes hold, because there are very few things like the iPhone or the smartphone, that just sort of, it's like we woke up one day and everybody had one. Right. And I remember when I was in the credit card industry, we were talking about digital wallets and how people weren't going to walk around with a wallet anymore. That was going to become so archaic. And people were predicting back in 2013 that this was 5 years away. And I was like, I remember reaching into my pocket and being like, when you can make this whole thing go away, not just one payment mechanism, but if you can make my, if you can digitize my health care card and my license and all the other stuff that's in my wallet besides a credit card, then I'll believe you. But I was like, no way. And sure enough, digital wallets are here. They've become commonplace, but they haven't replaced that physical wallet, because nobody's been able to bring it all together to really have everything in one place. I think Apple's probably trying, Google's probably trying, but maybe Salesforce is trying. I don't know, but it just hasn't gotten there yet. I had the same feeling when I was first exposed to VR and AR. I was like, there's some really cool stuff here. But do I think we're entering a world of Ready Player One, where we're like, we spend our whole days in virtual reality? No way. Don't think that's happening in either of our lifetimes. But are there places where it's applicable? For sure. It's really cool. And I think you make a good point that while we're at home, you would have thought maybe that's when it would have moved forward. And I agree with you, it just hasn't yet. But interesting point. So I know you can't talk specifics, but I'm just interested, as a guy who focuses, who knows a lot about customer experience and focuses there, and you're in charge of strategy and innovation. Instead of telling me about like what you're working on, I'm more interested in sort of the how and how the customer or the prospective customer is brought into your process as you guys are considering, say, new products or services.
Yeah, it's a multi-variant question. I'll take a stab at sort of just painting some broad brushstrokes around just things that we've learned and things that we're thinking about and things that we're observing, because maybe that's of the greatest benefit for for the folks that are paying attention. I think we've been, and I don't want to speak specifically on behalf of Salesforce, but there's been, as everybody knows, we've been growing really fast for quite a while now. And I think somewhere along that journey, like most companies, you realize our success is deeply coupled to our customer success. In fact, it's one of Salesforce's four core values. Getting to the how, though, right? Because most people would say that, but I think that we've focused a lot more on helping our customers realize value out of the investments that they've already made. And maybe this ties to the previous conversation, right? In terms of technology adoption, we were talking about it in the marketplace. I think the same analogy is true in individual organizations, whereby the speed by which we
I think we lost you there, Brian.
Yeah, sorry. This was kind of the weird. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, sorry. The the amount of time that it takes us to understand vision and solution, propose, and then deliver technology. We can do that a lot faster than organizations can generally adopt it. And the reason is the adoption has very little to do with the technology itself. It has to do with change management, it has to do with culture, it has to do with the talent that you have. It has to do with, moving and I've worked with a lot of large organization, right? And so like, how do you get 100,000 or 300,000 people, or, even if it's 50 or 10,000, like that's just a lot of change that you have to walk through in order to get people to change their mindset, and then change their behaviors, change the incentive systems to what they're optimizing for. Like that's real work that takes time. And so I think we're intentionally investing our time to be more thoughtful about not only the value that we can deliver, but how to help this large ecosystem, because we obviously can't do all of that and we're not best positioned to do all of that, but how do we orchestrate all of the players, and how do we help orchestrate to help our customers derive value quicker, faster, more effectively, and more importantly, how do we help them deliver better value for their customers, right? Because I think that's the nexus of where all of this thing comes together. The other thing I would say too, just in the current context, and I know I keep coming back to this, but I do think that this will have implications that all of us are still just trying to figure out. And I think just in terms of the demand and the aspiration, we've sort of had a portfolio of customers who had varying levels of appetite or aspiration. And when I say that, some of them are like, hey, like, we know what we do. We do it fairly well. We just need to automate it. We need to make it more intelligent. We need to digitize more of the processes embedded. To the other side going like, wow, we really have an aspiration to like fundamentally transform who we are and maybe get into adjacent marketplace. Like, we used to have a pretty broad portfolio that crossed that whole entire spectrum. We've seen sort of like this rapid bifurcation, right? Where like the middle of that portfolio has kind of been stripped out because some people have said like, look, like, we don't have appetite right now to like, what we want right now is really quick solutions that have close to an immediate ROI that does not take a huge amount of vision or strategy work. Like, we just need to stand up something to either strip out cost or, just make things better, faster, cheaper over the next 90 days. Like that, some of it's gone that way. And then
we want someone to do it for us. So we don't have
someone to do it for us. I mean, like, there's, all of our systems are being overwhelmed, right? So leaders are being forced to make these like, you either got to go left or right. And so then, and others are still going like, wow, we've maybe even seen an uptick in those that are willing to take bigger, more aggressive investments right now in this moment, because they're realizing like, man, like, we've deferred a lot of change that we know we've needed to do. And all of a sudden, we now know we need to invest heavily in all of that stuff. So, like, hey, all chips on the table. Like, let's go now. So that's just a couple of maybe interesting observations that that are helpful.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. I think that the different types of companies too, and there's no shortcut to a lot of this stuff. And
Nope.
And if there was, then everybody would do it, right? Then you guys just have to put on your website, click here to solve all of your problems.
Easy button. Yeah. Download now.
That'd be awesome, but it isn't that easy. And frankly, what I think we often find is that a solution for one company doesn't necessarily work, or one company's customers doesn't necessarily work for another. Want to just put up a quote here. I'm sure you've seen it before, but one of our listeners every week is quoting our good friend Steve Jobs about starting with the customer experience and working backwards. And that was sort of the basis of the question that I was asking you, is just sort of, where does the customer play in that role? And I remember visiting the headquarters of Comcast a couple of years ago, and I was really surprised. I wish I had the picture. It'll take me too long to bring it up, but I was really surprised and impressed that in every executive's office and in a lot of the conference rooms, they actually have an empty chair that says the word customer on it. And it is to remind people, as they're talking about whatever they're talking about building the business, that there's a customer that is going to be affected by it. And I think it's such a simple thing, but one of the best compliments I ever got was a boss that said to me that what he really liked about me was that I always managed to wear the customer hat in every business discussion. Yeah. And I never even realized I was doing it. But when I thought about it, I was like, yeah, that's exactly it. Is I try to think about what's the answer that makes us money and makes the customer happy. And can you do, and because if you can do both, that's when you really are moving the business forward. And unfortunately, too many companies go for the let's make us money or let's save us money without remembering the impact on the customer. We have a question also for you. So thank you to everybody that's watching. And as always, we love to take questions. And as I've said before many times, this show is unscripted. So we don't know Brian has no idea what question I'm about to ask him. But Ryan Baker says, I've been talking and thinking about customer experience and technology a lot lately. What do you think the future of touchless purchase is moving forward? Do you think that brands who are adapting those strategies now continue to keep it as a focus in the future, even post-COVID?
It's a great question. I don't know. Certainly, we will be heading towards touchless in the near term. The question is how much will it remain? I do think, like, if we zoom out a little bit, thinking about the customer experience or the consumer experience, like for a long time, Dan, folks like you, many others have been talking about this idea of relevance, right? Like, how do we be highly relevant? And that's sort of been like the nexus of determining what the experience should be, right? Like, what is the customer trying to get done? What are they trying to achieve? How do we align our capabilities to do that well? We're now all faced with two new dimensions that I don't think have really existed before. One being safety, right? It's not like companies didn't care about safety, but now you're talking about hospital grade safety in a retail store or a grocery store or a mall experience, or and so all of a sudden, that's where touchless comes in. Like, how do we reduce the risk? How do we, even if it's a perception issue, how do we make the people walking through our place or performing commerce with us, how do we make it safe and feel safe? And touchless certainly plays a big role. So I would expect that yes, absolutely, it's something to be investing in right now, and most are, if you are doing some person-to-person commerce, and I believe that it will persist. I would be surprised if it became the always-on norm. Like, obviously, human behavior will take over, and at some point in the future, people will once again hug and shake hands and all that sort of stuff and be fine with exchanging money. But I do think this is an accelerant for a lot of stuff that's been bubbling, and it's sort of shifted the timeline of adoption for, maybe some of these payment providers that, we're doing well. And now all of a sudden, if you look at Square and Stripe and some of these others that are enabling touchless commerce and some of the other providers, yeah, absolutely. So great question. Super interesting.
Yeah, great question, Ryan. Here's the customer chair I was mentioning about Comcast. And yeah, I think your answer is spot on, and particularly the comment about safety, which I think is going to be the #1 customer experience mantra in the next year plus, is that if customers don't feel safe doing business with you, they are not going to come. That doesn't matter if you're a doctor's office or dentist's office, a retail establishment, a restaurant, or what have you. You're going to have to ensure that customers feel safe. And the touchless payment, I think, is certainly a great way. That's one way to do that. I think you're going to see lots of other changes. Been doing a lot of work in the dental space, and even things like the waiting area and the types of furniture that they have, and which pieces of furniture are easier to clean and sanitize. And so you'll probably see less cushiony chairs and more harder, either wood or plastic chairs that are easier to wipe up and sanitize. And so I think it all falls under that. And the payment thing is, will come along because it's an ease and convenience thing, which is also a big customer experience piece, and it will be related to safety. And I think maybe that's the umbrella. As you mentioned that you thought maybe VR would go under, maybe the safety issue is what actually pushes touchless payments ahead even faster. Yep. Believe it or not, we have hit the end of the fastest half an hour on television. And I appreciate your time, Brian, but some really interesting stuff that you guys are doing. And obviously, Salesforce is a company that everybody kind of looks to for leadership, and so they're very lucky to have you. And I really appreciate you taking some time out today.
Thanks, Dan. This was awesome. It did go by very, very quickly. Thanks again for the invitation.
I promised that it would. Next week, we're going to welcome Micah Solomon to the show. Micah is a customer service consultant and speaker, the author of a number of different books. And ironically, Micah and I have, quote unquote, known each other for a very long time, and we've never met. In fact, I don't think I've ever even been on video with him before. So, and yet we've tweeted a million times and communicated on LinkedIn, et cetera. So very excited to have him next week. So thank you so much to Brian Vellmure for joining us this week, and appreciate everybody tuning in as always. This is Dan Gingiss, customer experience speaker, podcaster, author, coach. And if you ever need me, reach me at www.dangingiss.com. We'll see you next week and every week on the Experience Maker Show, 4 p.m. Eastern on Thursdays. Have a great weekend.